My name is Alex Hayes, and I run a small batch coffee roasting business in Fort Collins, Colorado. We're not some giant corporate outfit, just me, a couple of part-time employees, and a whole lot of beans from farms I've built relationships with over the years. Most days, my life is predictable in the best way possible. Up before dawn, roasting in the back room, deliveries to a few local cafes, then home in time to make dinner with my wife, Brooke. Or at least that's how it used to feel. A few weeks ago, Brooke and her mother Diane announced they were taking a trip just to relax. Brooke said it like it was a spur-of-the-moment thing, just some coastal air, maybe a little shopping, nothing big. Diane backed her up immediately, telling me they'd found a cute little place by the California coast. I smiled and wished them a good time. At the moment, I had no reason to think anything of it. The morning they were set to leave, I got up early to make coffee and load their luggage into the back of Diane's SUV. Brooke was still upstairs getting ready, Diane already double-checking her purse. I had a small card I'd written for Brooke. Nothing fancy, just a short note to tell her I'd miss her and to have fun. I thought it would be a sweet surprise for her to find when she unpacked. That's when I noticed her tablet on the kitchen counter. It was angled just enough toward me that I could see the screen still glowing. I wasn't snooping. I just couldn't help noticing the big, bold header. Booking confirmation, Bellagio Hotel and Casino. I froze. I knew that name instantly. The Bellagio isn't anywhere near the California coast. It's Las Vegas. And not only was the location wrong, but it was for a premium fountain view suite. For 2 guests. Paid for with a credit card I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a good 30 seconds, trying to make sense of it. Maybe she'd booked the wrong thing by accident? But the confirmation email was detailed. Dates matched her vacation. The suite upgrade was noted, and the reservation was final. Still, I didn't say anything right then. I slipped the card into her bag, closed the zipper, and told myself I'd bring it up casually. But curiosity got the better of me. On our shared laptop, Brooke sometimes forgot to log out of her rideshare account. I opened it. Her most recent trip? A ride to the Denver airport that morning, nothing unusual, except the ride history showed 3 pieces of luggage. Brooke's suitcase was one, Diane's another, but what about the third? By the time she came downstairs, I had my questions ready. So, Bellagio? I asked, holding the tablet loosely, trying to keep my voice light. She barely glanced at it before rolling her eyes. Oh, the app glitched. It must have mixed up our booking with someone else's. We're still going to California. Don't worry. And the extra suitcase? I pressed. Shopping for Mom, she said without missing a beat. You know how she likes to stock up when we're out of state. It's easier to bring an empty bag than ship stuff back. Her tone was confident, too confident. She wasn't fumbling for excuses. She already had them lined up, and that confidence was what unsettled me the most. I didn't argue. Instead, I helped them load the last of the bags, kissed her goodbye, and waved them off. She even smiled and blew me a kiss from the passenger seat. On the drive home, though, the explanations started to unravel in my mind. The Bellagio booking wasn't a glitch. I've booked hotels online for years, and nothing like that just happens. And the extra suitcase? Maybe plausible, but it felt like a placeholder excuse, something rehearsed. Then the memories started hitting me. The first red flag had been a few months back when Brooke quietly removed my access to her shared location on her phone. We'd had it set up for years, mostly for safety, and she'd brushed it off with, "Oh, I was cleaning up my settings. I didn't push at the time." Then there were the new passwords on her phone and tablet, something she'd never bothered with before. And the late workouts at a gym conveniently close to the business district, miles away from the gym we used to go to together. I remembered finding a crumpled receipt in her coat pocket from a lingerie store she'd never shopped at before. The purchase was late at night, hours after she'd said she was grabbing drinks with Diane. There were also a few small but nagging details. A second phone charger I found in the hallway one morning, not matching either of our devices. Brooke laughing it off as something Diane must have left behind. Cash withdrawals made around midnight. And both Brooke and Diane giving me identical word-for-word answers when I once asked where they'd been on a random Thursday. They said women's checkups, but couldn't name the clinic. Around the same time, Brooke had opened a separate credit card in her name only, something she said was just for rewards points. She'd also convinced me to move part of our savings into what she called a short-term deposit, something I'd never seen paperwork for. But the thing that kept coming back to me was the slip of paper I'd found in her car a couple of weeks earlier. A parking ticket from the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas, dated just 2 months ago. She told me she was in Denver that weekend with Diane. Now I was staring at the same hotel name on a booking confirmation for this supposed California trip. I pulled into my driveway that morning and sat there with the engine running, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The unease I'd been ignoring for months was now a pounding certainty in my chest. Something was wrong, and Brooke was hiding it behind Diane's constant presence and a trail of half-truths. I told myself I'd wait until she got back before deciding what to do. But deep down, I already knew I wouldn't be able to sit on this quietly, because if she could look me in the eye with my card still in her bag and tell me about an app glitch with a straight face, then there was no telling what else she could do. The week Brooke and Diane were gone felt longer than any week I'd ever lived through. I buried myself in work, roasting beans, making deliveries, and tinkering with a new blend for a local cafe. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, my mind kept circling back to that booking confirmation and the parking ticket from 2 months ago. Brooke's texts while she was away were short and vague. A couple of having fun messages, the occasional picture of the ocean, oddly generic ones that could have been pulled from anywhere, and plenty of wish you were here hearts. She never mentioned specifics about where they'd been that day or what they were doing, which was unusual for her. I didn't press. I figured if she was lying, she'd just feed me more lies. Better to let her feel comfortable for now, maybe even careless. The night before they were set to come back, I got a bank alert about an unusually large charge, a transfer from Brooke's account to AC Consulting. The name meant nothing to me, and the amount wasn't small. I made a mental note to check on it later. When I picked them up from the airport the next day, Brooke looked fresh and energetic, like she'd spent the week at a spa. Diane looked equally put together, makeup perfect, hair styled. Both were laughing about something private when they spotted me. The car ride home was filled with light conversation. Nothing about the trip beyond, it was relaxing, and we needed that. I asked where they stayed, and Brooke rattled off the name of a little inn I'd never heard of, one that didn't match the booking on her tablet. The very next morning, Brooke told me she and Diane had doctor's appointments, routine women's checkups, she called them. Given that they'd used that excuse before, I didn't buy it, but I said nothing. That morning, Paul, my father-in-law, Diane's husband, stopped by the shop. He's a quiet man, but I'd always gotten along with him. Over coffee, I mentioned the doctor visits, and his eyebrows went up. They didn't tell me anything about that, he said. Mind if I tag along? Just to check in. We drove together to the clinic Brooke had named. It wasn't a general women's health clinic at all. It was an obstetrics practice. My stomach tightened as we stepped into the hallway lined with pastel-colored walls and framed pictures of newborns. We waited quietly, pretending to read pamphlets. That's when I heard it. A doctor, speaking to a nurse just a few feet away in a tone that carried down the hall. Both patients need additional tests, she said. Given the unusual circumstances of conception, I want to be sure we're thorough. And since they're both pregnant by the same man, there may be unique considerations. Took me a second to process what I just heard. Both patients. Same man. My brain didn't want to put the pieces together, but they were already falling into place. Brooke and Diane weren't just keeping a secret trip from us. They were sharing the same affair. Paul and I didn't speak at first. We just stood there, each of us probably running through the same mental inventory. All the excuses, all the late nights, all the girls' trips. I felt my chest tighten, not just from the betrayal, but from the sheer scope of it. This wasn't just a case of my wife cheating. This was a coordinated, deliberate deception involving her own mother. When Brooke and Diane came out a few minutes later, both smiling faintly but avoiding our eyes, Paul and I didn't confront them right then. We just followed them out, letting them think we were none the wiser. That night, Paul called me. His voice was steady, but I could hear the strain. We need to find out who this man is. he said. And we need to know how far this goes. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about truth. I started with Brooke's new credit card. She'd been careless enough to leave a statement in the home office once, and I'd snapped a photo of it. One of the biggest charges was a prepayment for a penthouse suite in another city. Another was that same transfer to AC Consulting. A quick public records search turned up the name behind the company. Adam Cole. Except Adam Cole wasn't his real name. His real name was Aaron Caldwell, and a quick scroll through his online footprint painted a picture I wish I could erase from my mind. He was a self-styled business coach who traveled constantly, running seminars and one-on-one consultations for women in different states. His social media presence was squeaky clean, no personal photos, no hints of family. But when I dug deeper, I found references to him in closed online groups, the kind you can only see when someone leaks a screenshot. Aaron didn't just sell coaching. He built relationships, blurred boundaries, and in more than a few cases, outright seduced his clients. The sick part? It worked. Paul, meanwhile, had managed to get into Diane's old phone backups. In one of them, there was a shared hidden contact, a virtual number labeled only with a heart emoji. There was also a calendar app, synced to an email I didn't recognize, with travel dates marked for Las Vegas and Phoenix. Both lined up perfectly with Brooke and Diane's supposed vacations. From there, the pieces fell into place fast. Aaron's legal wife was in Phoenix, heavily pregnant, if her public baby registry was accurate. She had no idea what her husband had been doing on his business trips. We reached out to her anonymously at first, sending proof we thought she'd believe. The booking confirmations, the transfer receipts, and a handful of messages between Diane and Aaron that Paul had pulled from the backup. Her reply came within hours. She wanted to talk. That conversation turned into an alliance. We compared timelines, swapped **TS, and discovered that Aaron's pattern was almost scripted. He'd meet women through his coaching, charm them into personal contact, and then convince them to open accounts or take out microloans in their own names, supposedly to invest in a joint venture. All the while, he was selling the same dream to multiple women in multiple states. When the three of us compiled everything, the bank transfers, the hotel receipts, the appointment schedules, the messages, it was enough to make my stomach turn. But it was also enough to take to the police. Once the initial shock wore off, the investigation became almost mechanical. Every scrap of information Paul, Aaron's wife, and I found was logged, copied, and backed up in multiple places. None of us trusted that Aaron wouldn't catch wind of what we were doing, and we wanted to be ready if he tried to cover his tracks. The more we dug, the uglier it got. Aaron wasn't just seducing women, he was using them as fronts. Several victims, including Brooke and Diane, had bank accounts in their names linked to shell companies he controlled. Those companies would receive payments from his so-called clients, then funnel the money out through prepaid cards, cash withdrawals, and transfers overseas. We even found microloan applications submitted in Brooke's name. She'd never mentioned them to me. When I called the lender, pretending to verify a detail, they said the loans had been approved and drawn down within 24 hours of her signing. Aaron's wife in Phoenix, her name was Melissa, proved to be relentless. She called in favors from friends in law enforcement, filed public records requests, and managed to get partial financial statements from 2 of his LLCs. What they showed matched our theory. The accounts would spike with deposits right after Aaron's seminars, then drain almost completely within days. It was fraud, plain and simple. The most damning discovery came from a file Paul retrieved off Diane's cloud account. It was a PDF contract between Diane and AC Consulting, authorizing a transfer of $40,000 into an investment pool. The signature looked legitimate, but the witness line was blank, meaning it could be challenged as invalid. By the time we handed everything over to the police, we had a **TS of text and messaging app conversations between Aaron and both Brooke and Diane, a multiple booking confirmations for hotels in Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Chicago, bank transfers to AC Consulting from at least 4 women in 3 different states, a calendar entries linking Aaron's travel dates with the women's supposed vacations, a paternity test requests, through my attorney, proving that both Brooke and Diane's pregnancies traced back to Aaron. The police didn't just take the file, they assigned it to a task force. Apparently, Aaron's name had surfaced in a fraud case in Nevada months earlier, but there hadn't been enough evidence to move forward. Our package changed that. In the weeks that followed, I tried to keep my day-to-day life functioning. I still roasted coffee, still filled orders, still opened the shop every morning. But underneath, I was living in a kind of suspended reality, waiting for the hammer to fall. The tension with Brooke became unbearable. She knew I knew more than I was saying, but she kept up the act, avoiding direct confrontation, making small talk about bills or groceries as if nothing had changed. When my attorney sent her notice of the divorce filing, she stopped speaking to me entirely. Diane reacted the same way with Paul. From what he told me, she packed a bag and left town within days, leaving only a short note about needing space. Neither of them was willing to cooperate with the investigation. That didn't matter anymore. The evidence spoke louder than anything they could have admitted. 2 months later, I got a call from Melissa. "They've issued warrants," she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "Not just here, in Nevada and Arizona too." Aaron was picked up in Flagstaff while checking into yet another hotel under an alias. Alongside charges for fraud and identity theft, prosecutors added bigamy. Melissa's marriage to him was still legal, and yet there was evidence he'd gone through a marriage ceremony in Nevada with another woman 2 years earlier. News of his arrest spread fast in the online circles he'd preyed on. More women came forward, some with their own horror stories, others just relieved to see his face in a mugsh*T. The task force set up a hotline for potential victims, and last I heard, over a dozen had called in. For me, the arrest was a turning point, but not the end. The financial fallout was brutal. Between the short-term deposit Brooke had siphoned into accounts connected to Aaron and the loans in her name, I was looking at tens of thousands of dollars in potential liability. My lawyer moved quickly to get the debts frozen while the fraud case worked through court. Chargeback claims for the largest transfers were approved after the bank saw the police reports. Paul had his own mess to clean up. He ended up selling part of his business to cover immediate legal fees, then filed a civil suit against Aaron for damages. Whether he'll see a dime from it is anyone's guess. Scammers like Aaron rarely leave much behind for restitution. The pregnancies were the hardest part to even think about. My attorney pushed for paternity confirmation as soon as we had cause, and the results were as expected. Both Brooke and Diane's children were Aaron's. That detail, painful as it was, helped strengthen the criminal case and block them from using certain accounts tied to Aaron's operations. Brooke's reaction to the test results was silence. No apology, no explanation, just a void. She left Fort Collins not long after, moving somewhere out of state with Diane. By the 6-month mark, Aaron's network had been exposed as more than just an affair pipeline. It was a money laundering scheme. Shell accounts, fake invoices, loans and victims' names, all run through a tangle of LLCs. Prosecutors were building a multi-state case that could put him away for decades. When he finally appeared in court for the first hearing, he looked nothing like the polished coach from his photos. The arrogance was still there in flashes, but his suit was rumpled, and his eyes darted constantly, like a man used to controlling the room and suddenly realizing no one was listening. That day, walking out of the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not joy, but relief. The chapter wasn't closed yet, but the ending was in sight. And for the first time since that morning with the tablet on the counter, I could picture a future where his name wasn't in my daily thoughts. 6 months after his arrest, the trial began in earnest. By then, Aaron's case file was massive, hundreds of pages of financial records, travel logs, victim statements, and correspondence. I'd been warned by the DA's office that my testimony might be needed, but in the end, the paper trail was so overwhelming that most of the victims didn't have to take the stand. The charges were stacked high. Multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, wire fraud across state lines, and bigamy. The prosecution strategy was simple. Paint Aaron not just as a manipulator, but as a calculated predator who built his entire livelihood on exploiting trust. Melissa was there every day. We'd stayed in contact, though I could see the trial was taking a toll on her. She was raising a newborn alone, fighting for restitution, and watching her husband's double life dismantled in a public courtroom. Paul came down for the opening statements, sitting in the row behind me. Neither Brooke nor Diane appeared at any stage. They were listed as uncooperative witnesses in the filings. The defense tried to spin Aaron as a legitimate businessman whose personal mistakes had been blown out of proportion. But that narrative crumbled fast once the prosecutors displayed the financial flowcharts, showing money moving from victims' accounts to his shell companies, then vanishing through cash withdrawals and offshore transfers. When the verdict came, it wasn't dramatic. No gasps, no tears, just the judge reading guilty over and over, each word a nail sealing his fate. Aaron Caldwell was sentenced to a combined 27 years, with the possibility of parole after 18. Given the number of jurisdictions involved, there's a good chance other charges will keep him behind bars even longer. The day after sentencing, I got a formal notice from the court that restitution claims were approved. Whether that would actually lead to recovered money was doubtful, but it meant I could start closing the chapter financially. The bank had already reversed most of Brooke's fraudulent transfers, and my lawyer secured agreements from the lenders to discharge the debts tied to the microloans. I filed for divorce the week after Aaron's arrest, and it finalized quietly a few months later. No property disputes. Brooke didn't contest anything. She'd left town with Diane, disappearing into a version of life I couldn't picture and didn't want to. Paul and I kept in touch. His own divorce dragged on longer. Diane fought for a share of the business she'd never worked in, a move that made him tighten his jaw every time it came up. Eventually, he agreed to a buyout just to be done with it. The sale left him with less than he'd hoped, but enough to retire early if he chose. As for me, the coffee business became my anchor. The rhythm of roasting, the hum of the grinders, the warm scent of beans turning in the drum. It all gave me something constant when the rest of my life was shifting. Customers didn't know the details, but a few who'd read between the lines offered quiet words of support. In the months after the trial, I noticed something strange in myself. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had burned hot in the beginning had been replaced by something steadier. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of acceptance. I'd learned the hard way that not all questions have satisfying answers, and some betrayals can't be explained in a way that makes sense. I made small changes that added up to something bigger. I got rid of the last pieces of furniture Brooke had chosen, repainting the walls in colors I liked. I canceled the joint accounts, updated my will, and made sure no one but me had access to the shop's finances. Melissa visited Fort Collins once, bringing her baby with her. We met for lunch, and while we didn't dwell on the past, there was an unspoken acknowledgement between us. We'd been part of the same storm, and we'd both survived. She told me she was moving back closer to family and starting a job at a nonprofit. It feels like starting over with no map, she admitted. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. I knew exactly what she meant. One crisp fall morning, about a year after everything began, I unlocked the shop before sunrise and realized I felt calm. Not the tense, brittle calm that comes from holding everything together, but the kind that comes when the ground under your feet feels solid again. I had orders to fill, beans to roast, and a day that was mine to shape. The story had started with a trip Brooke called just to relax. A casual lie delivered over coffee in our kitchen. The turning point hadn't been the Vegas booking, the extra suitcase, or even the hidden credit card. It had been the voice of a doctor in a quiet hallway, speaking words that cracked my life open. Both patients pregnant by the same man. That moment had felt like falling, but it was also the point where the truth became undeniable, where I stopped second-guessing my instincts and started building my escape. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that deception thrives in the space between suspicion and certainty. I'd spent months in that gap, giving the benefit of the doubt to someone who didn't deserve it. Once certainty arrived, everything changed. Now, when I lock up the shop at night and walk home under the glow of the street lamps, I pass the same coffee mug in the window of a thrift store. One that says, "Best husband ever." I've thought about buying it back, but I never do. Some things are better left behind. My life isn't what it was before, and it never will be. But it's mine again, and that's enough. 2 years have passed since Aaron Caldwell's sentencing, and while the headlines have faded, the ripples from what happened still move through my life in quiet, unexpected ways. The coffee shop has grown, not into a chain or anything flashy, but enough that I've hired 2 more employees and signed a lease on the space next door to expand roasting capacity. The extra room means I can supply more local cafes and even a couple of restaurants. Some mornings I still do the opening alone, just to hear the hiss of the steam wand in the still dark shop, like a heartbeat. I've gotten used to living by myself. At first, the silence felt heavy, every creak in the house reminding me of absence. Now it's comfortable. I can leave the radio off, walk barefoot across the kitchen without worrying about waking anyone. Make dinner at midnight if I feel like it. Small freedoms, but they add up. Brooke never reached out after she left town. I don't know where she and Diane settled, and I haven't asked. Once in a while, someone will mention seeing one of them online, usually vague comments about family life with no photos of the kids. The paternity tests were clear enough, Aaron's children, but I doubt either of them talks about that openly. Paul sold the remainder of his business and moved to a smaller place in New Mexico. We keep in touch, mostly by phone. He sounds lighter now, though I can hear a trace of the old weight in his voice when Diane comes up. He told me once that betrayal by a spouse is like breaking a bone. It heals, but the ache is always there when the weather changes. Melissa remarried last year. She sent me a wedding photo, not because we're close friends, but I think because we're linked by a chapter of life that no one else could fully understand. Her new husband adopted her child, and from what she's shared, they're building something steady, far removed from the chaos Aaron left behind. As for Aaron, he's still in prison. Every so often, a notice from the Department of Corrections lands in my mailbox. Updates about appeals, hearings, or changes in his custody status. I don't read most of them in detail. The first year, I tracked everything obsessively, wanting to know if he might find some legal loophole. Now, I let the envelopes sit on the counter for days before tossing them in a drawer. His world is contained. Mine isn't. There are moments when the past still catches me off guard. The other day, I was cleaning the garage and found a box I hadn't opened since before the divorce. Old photos, cards, and receipts from trips Brooke and I took back when I thought we were unshakable. I didn't feel the gut punch I expected. Just a dull, distant awareness that I was looking at a version of my life that no longer existed. I set the box aside for donation without a second thought. Dating again was strange at first. The idea of opening my life to someone after everything felt reckless. But I eased into it, starting with coffee meetups and group hikes with people I met through friends. About a year ago, I met Claire, a graphic designer who works remotely and spends her free time painting landscapes. She knows the broad strokes of my past but never pushes for details. That, in itself, feels like a kind of grace. We're not rushing anything. After what happened, I've learned that the pace of trust is slower than most people think. But with her, I don't feel the need to watch for lies hiding in casual words. I don't find myself checking receipts or scanning for tells. That's not to say the instinct is gone. It probably never will be, but it doesn't run my life anymore. One habit I haven't broken is keeping personal and business finances separate and airtight. Every statement is reviewed. Every transfer has a record. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd become this meticulous, I would have laughed. Now it's simply how I keep the doors open, both the shop's and my own peace of mind. Last winter, a reporter reached out, saying she was doing a follow-up on the Caldwell case. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak about the personal impact. I declined, not because I was afraid to tell my story, but because I didn't want Aaron's name back in my day-to-day vocabulary. Some chapters don't need reopening. The only time I came close to breaking that rule was this spring, when a letter arrived from the State Victim Services Office. Inside was a check, a small restitution payment from Aaron's prison wages. It wasn't much, but holding it in my hand was surreal. I deposited it into a savings account I'd opened after the divorce, one earmarked for travel. Someday, I think I'll take a trip with no shadows trailing me. On warm evenings, I sit outside the shop after closing, watching the last light fade over the rooftops. People pass by on the sidewalk, couples holding hands, students on bikes, dog walkers. Life moves. It doesn't wait for you to be ready, and it doesn't stop because you've been hurt. If there's anything the last 2 years have taught me, it's that starting over isn't a single act. It's a series of small, deliberate choices. Choosing to get out of bed when you'd rather stay under the covers. Choosing to roast another batch of beans when you're not sure who will buy them. Choosing to see the day ahead as something you can shape, instead of something you have to survive. And, maybe most importantly, choosing not to let the worst thing that happened to you be the thing that defines you. I'm not the same person I was before that morning with Brooke's tablet glowing on the counter. I've got more lines on my face, a few more gray hairs, and a much clearer understanding of how quickly trust can be shattered. But I also know how to rebuild. Some nights, locking up the shop, I catch my reflection in the front window. Just a man in an apron, keys in hand, ready to head home. No labels, no past tense. Just here, in this moment, breathing air that's mine to breathe. That's enough.